Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on how to use MDX in your planning analytics environment, part 3. So just as a brief introduction of who's on today's call, my name is Lee Lazaro, and I'm Revelwood's Planning Analytics Practice Leader. I have more than 25 years of OLAP experience, most of which is associated with TM1, Planning Analytics, and I'm joined today by my colleague Ivan Sapiro, one of our consultants and our MDX expert. Ivan also brings multiple decades of both financial and technical experience to the table, including serving as the lead consultant of many of our PA implementations. So what are we going to talk about today? The agenda for today's session is we're first going to give you a little bit of a background, a little intro about Revelwood, who we are, why you're here today, why you're listening to us. And before we jump right into part 3, we're then going to do a bit of a really brief refresher on the items and the aspects that we covered in parts 1 and 2. Then, after we've done the refresher, I'm going to turn things over to Ivan. He's going to give us a bit more of a deep dive in regards to MDX functionality, some functions and commands, and how to create views. Once that's completed, I'm going to jump back in again and we'll talk about some next steps. So first off, let me give you a little background about who is Revelwood and again, why are you here listening to us today? Okay. Revelwood is an IBM Gold business partner with a specialty in data science and business analytics. As you can see from the logo at the bottom of the screen, we've been in business for over 30 years, and our specialty is helping FP&A professionals solve their business problems. We've performed hundreds of successful planning analytics implementations worldwide to all types of companies that span various industries, various sizes. We have a very, very deep bench of certified PA consultants, and we pride ourselves in bringing both the technical expertise and the business acumen needed to help with your FP&A needs. This is why we like to say at Revelwood, we speak business first. Today is the third webinar in our MDX series, all of which can be found on our Revelwood YouTube channel. So if you were just to go out to YouTube, search for Revelwood, you'll be able to see all of these webinars, including other topics that we've covered regarding some financial processes such as allocations and long-term planning, some components about software functionality, version 12, cloud migration, etc. But today's focus is going to be on MDX. So let me give you a brief summary of what parts 1 and 2 consisted of. Okay. Part 1, the goal of our part 1 webinar was a very introductory aspect of what is MDX. We talked a little bit about basic syntax, the difference between the parentheses versus the curly braces versus the square brackets. We talked about some basic functionality such as TM1 subset all, TM1 sort. And we gave some simple examples of how can you? How can you show an element? How can you show an element with all ancestry, pieces like that? Then in part 2, we went a little bit deeper for our advanced one where we talked about some complex examples. This gave us the opportunity to expand upon part 1 where we were able to put two components together. We had the plus sign. We were able to put hard-coded values. We referenced how we were able to convert some of these MDX expressions in the web environment into Excel, and we created some examples. Today's session, part 3, is how we're able to merge together what we learned in part 1 and part 2. Part 1 and part 2 focused on one single dimension, creating expressions that allow me to say, show me time, show me accounts, show me one specific dimension. Merging these dimensions together in the TM1 world, in the planning analytics world, is what we call views or explorations. Today is going to focus on that. We're going to focus on how we can merge those dimensions together and create more than just one-dimensional component at a time. So before we jump right into the deep dive, I want to start with a brief refresher on a couple of topics that were covered during those sessions that I just gave an overview for. Okay. First off, what is MDX? MDX stands for multi-dimensional expression. And really what that is, it's the OLAP equivalent of SQL. So many of you, hopefully most of you know the concept of what is SQL. SQL stands for Structured Query Language, and really what that's designed to do, it's designed to query two-dimensional databases. So when we have a series of tables, we have, if you think of it like Excel, you've got your up and downs and left and rights, and that's where the two-dimensional aspects stop. The purpose of OLAP, the purpose of multi-dimensional, is to say don't stop at just those two components. almost the equivalent of a pivot table when you think about it in the Excel environment. Whereas SQL is designed to create expressions over a two-dimensional set of tables, MDX, multi-dimensional expressions, are designed to query more than two dimensions. Okay? Now, what is MDX? MDX is an industry standard language. It's something that is used with all multidimensional languages. But based on this, there's a specific TM1 version, a specific planning analytics version. Okay? The TM1, the PA version, doesn't support the entire language. There's aspects of multidimensional expressions, there's aspects of OLAP that don't really come into play with the PA environment. But in contrast to that, there's also some specific MDX functions and specific MDX expressions that are added just for planning analytics. Okay? Now, when we talk about that, we're going to have a couple of terms. We're going to have a couple of phrases that we talk about today. So I want to preface things a little bit and talk about just a couple of the terms that you're going to hear today. Okay. First thing, a set. The purpose of a set is to define the members in a single dimension. In the legacy tools, we used to call that subset. And really what the concept of a set is to say, I want to look at some elements within a single dimension. Based on what we have on the screen here, you could see that it's a time dimension. You could see that we're looking at a couple of elements. We're looking at 4 different quarters over the course of one set of components. That's what we're going to call set. Legacy to new world. In the legacy, we called that subset. And one of the habits, one of the things for us to get into the, to start saying is, let's start calling it a set, because subset might have different meanings. Second thing, a tuple. Okay. Now, what is a tuple? To read it directly off the screen, a tuple is an ordered collection of one or more members from different dimensions. In essence, what a tuple is, it's what we used to call a cell, whether we're talking Excel or whether we're talking the views. And actually, we still do call it a cell. So the concept of a tuple is to say, I want to go past one dimension. I want to take a look at at a piece of every dimension in the cube. In essence, what you know as your DBR formulas. Okay? That's what we call a tuple in the MDX world. And the last piece from that high-level terminology is a view. The concept of a view is to put all these tuples together. Okay? In the new world, this is now what we call an exploration. This is what we used to call a view. So if you think about it, just like the TM1 world, it's work your way up. We've got pieces that build into pieces that build into pieces. A set, bunch of sets build into a tuple. A bunch of aspects of a tuple build into a view. And that's a very, very high level. I know that I did a bit of a disservice by saying, let me explain MDX over the course of 2 minutes. But the concept of what is MDX and what are some of these terms that you're going to hear today was an introductory aspect of what we talked about in the first 2 sessions of the webinar. And now what I'm going to do is now I'm going to turn things over to Ivan to definitely dig a little bit deeper and show you some MDX examples.
Okay, let's have fun. So thanks for the intro, Lee. I'm Ivan Sapero, Senior Consultant, and I'm going to do the fun stuff. I have PAW open, and I built a book that will go through a whole slew of examples in a step-by-step fashion, so that by the end of this webinar, you will be dangerous with MDX, but when you see MDX, it will make sense. I'm going to open up my book called, creatively enough, MDX Webinar. There's a lot of stuff going on, but just follow me. It's all, I have a path. I have a learning path for you, okay? So we're going to start at the top left. Just like Lee was referring to, basic MDX syntax is that it is a query language, almost like SQL, but for OLAP. And the basic template for a query is what we have here. Now, what I have with the columns and the rows, these are just my comments so you understand, but let's go through it. You have your select statement, almost like SQL. You're selecting some data points or some tuples. Then you have to define the sets. Now, notice that the sets have curly brackets because everything is a set. That is what MDX understands. So everything is in the curly brackets, and you have to tell it the position, whether it's on the columns or on the rows. That is totally different than a SQL query. The from, the cube of interest, and then the where is all of the filters or the title dimensions. I'm moving over into the cube because we talked about most everything here except the second row. I just want to point out that non-empty is how you define the zero suppress on an MDX statement, whether it be on the columns, on the rows, on neither, or on both. But you can get the right view by playing with the non-empties, and we'll go through that in a little bit. Coming over to the right, over here, now I'm going to spend a little bit of time here because this concept of how you refer to an element will, it'll pervade all of the slides that we're going to have. The way that in MDX you define an element, or you refer to an element, pardon me, is with the dimension, the hierarchy, and the element separated by periods with the curly bracket. That is how you define an element, you refer to an element. For example, right underneath, you see that I have the BPM value dimension in the BPM value hierarchy, and I'm pulling over the element called value. I'm going to come back to this in a second, but just to show you what this is, BPM value value is this data point. In this dimension, I'm pulling that element. So I'm going to go through why BPM value seems to be duplicated. It is this concept of hierarchies that you have in TM1, not roll-ups, but that new concept of hierarchies. In this particular model that we are using, we're not using hierarchies. So then the second parameter, it will default to the name of the dimension. So it looks redundant, but it does serve a purpose. That is why you see in a lot of these examples, you will see it repeated, but trust me, the second one is the hierarchy. Okay, I'm going to come down over to the left, and we're going to start building our queries and then add more bells and whistles to it. The simplest query that you can build in MDX is to pull a single value. So what I have written here is this query is called select non-empty. I am using the non-empty keyword. The curly bracket, I am referring to the value element on the columns. And this is weird if you're coming from SQL, columns come first. It's just a little mental shift you have to do. So I want the value element and I want the file root element on the rows from the BPM controls. So this is the result of this. I'm going to go off on a little tangent because if you click on the view, you can also click on MDX and you will see the MDX that the view is using. So it's not like hidden. You can actually do it right here in PAW. Okay, off on the tangent, I'm back at the material. Multiple values. This is great, right? You have X and Y, but what about if I want two elements? So what you do here is you simply define the elements using the syntax that we just covered. You separate them with a comma. It's kind of like a static subset, you know, it's just hard-coded. In this particular case, I'm looking at file root, server data directory from BPM controls. This is useful, but it's kind of limited because we have subsets, we have dynamic subsets, we have a whole set of tools in TM1. You can still use them in MDX. So here I am using a subset instead of named elements. Almost everything is the same. The first line is the same. So is the second. Now the third one, it kind of changes. What I'm using here is a TM1 subset to set. This is what Lee was referring to, that there are some MDX commands that are specific to TM1. This is one of them. The set in MDX and the subset in TM1, they're a little bit different. And this TM1 subset to set does what's called a cast, or it changes it from the TM1 implementation into the standard MDX implementation. Great. But what's going on? Well, what we're doing is we're saying in the BPM control dimension, in the BPM control hierarchy of that dimension, please pull over the monthly control subset, and it's a public subset. You can have public or private. This public is actually optional. and it will always default to the private one. But in the essence of being thorough, this is the entire statement, including the optional parameter. I put that on 1 from the BPM controls. So now you change the subset, and it will be reflected in this MDX statement. So these are the simplest MDX statements. Let's go ahead and complicate it a little bit more. Here, we only have one dimension on the X, one dimension on the Y. Let's stack them. So I'm going to go over to my next tab, and what I have is one view that has stacked dimensions on the columns. You stack dimensions in MDX by using the cross-join operator, which is the multiplication sign or the asterisk. Much like the old views and architect and perspectives, MDX works the same way in that when you are going to stack dimensions, TM1 will show you every possible combination, and then it'll apply the zero suppress. That is what this MDX is doing. In this particular case, I am using, once again, the TM1 subset to set. For the default subset, within curly brackets, remember you got it, everything's within curly brackets, then I'm multiplying it by 2016 and putting that on the columns. So if you want to stack, you just put the multiplication, and of course I could add more dimensions, but we're going baby steps, we're going step by step. Let me talk about this next part. What I have done in this MDX statement is I have selected certain elements, certain company elements to be on the rows. Notice it's like we've talked about already, it's dimension, hierarchy, and the element, it's the dimension element principal name. I could also use an alias here instead of 001, I could use CRP-corporate. MDX would still know what to do. So I just wanted to show you that you can use either or. There are many ways to refer to it, but the easiest way is either with an alias or with the dimension element principal name. And now we're looking down here at the bottom, now we're getting into the where, which is the filters. And I'll get a little bit technical, but it's like the borders of this view. We're limiting it only to operating expenses without compensation, total departments, and you would follow kind of the same methodology where it's always dimension. I know you're going to be sick of me saying this, but it's dimension, hierarchy name, and the element using the commas. So that is how you build a view using dimension element principal names and stacking, okay? Remember when Lee did his introduction, he did state that there were kind of two flavors, and I'm making the air quotes sign. There's two flavors of TM1. There's what we're looking at here, which is the TM1 to do a view on the XY coordinate plane, but there also is the MDX that you use just for a subset. So they are different, but they are related. You can use one in the other. Well, I misspoke. Let's be very clear. You can use the MDX of a subset in here in the MDX of the view. In this next tab, I will show you how I did that. So instead of pointing to a dynamic subset that has MDX, I pulled out that MDX from the subset and I'm putting it directly in the view. So in this particular example, I have the TM1 subset to set, just looking at the 2016 public subset. And what I've done is I took that MDX out of the dynamic subset and I can put it right here. So all of the logic and all of the filtering is encapsulated in this view, and it doesn't depend on anything that has been saved off as a dynamic subset. There are use cases for either or. It's not that one is better or one is worse. It just depends on how you want to build your subset. In this particular, I'm sorry, how you want to build your view. In this particular case, I am using two TM1 specific MDX statements, TM1 subset all, which is basically show all. And of the show all, I am filtering to the 0 level, and I'm putting that on the rows. So you are not limited by using one version or one flavor of MDX, for lack of a better word, you can combine them as needed. All right. Next, we're going to talk about filtering by attribute. It's going to get a little bit more complicated, but don't freak out on me. I'll talk you through it, okay? We're going to talk about using the filter command in MDX. This is the syntax. You are going to give filter a set and then a logical expression. What filter will do is it will apply that logical expression to every member of the set. It is kind of like I don't want to say a filter, it's kind of like a loop. Well, it will loop through everything in the set, and then whatever matches that logical expression, it'll return it to the view. So this is the view. Let's talk about the MDX. I have one element on the columns, 2015 of BPM period. But now here's the interesting stuff. I am filtering. We know that the first parameter is the set expression. So my set expression is going to be TM1 subset all. I'm showing all the departments. But the logical expression that I am going to apply to each department is here. So what I am saying is, from the BPM department dimension, in the BPM department hierarchy, the current member, remember I'm looping, so the ith member, if you're going to do loops using the I variable, that current member has a property, i.e. an attribute, and that property is called pay method, and I only want the ones that have monthly in it. And I am putting that on the rows. So you are taking all of the little pieces that we've already covered, and you're sort of putting it together and building the view step by step. You are filtering using the logical expression. Of course, the filters can get very complicated, but if you just do it step by step, you will always follow this pattern. Set expression, logical expression. We will run into that in a few minutes, so just make sure you remember that. I'll come back to it if needed. Then now we're going to talk about calculated members. You can do math in MDX. There are pros and I'll start with the pros and cons. There are pros and cons of doing math in MDX. Yes, the MDX gets a little bit more complicated, but the MDX is doing the calculations. The calculations only live in the view, and you don't need a feeder. It's just doing the math. Now, the con is that the calculation only lives in the view. So a report can't have like a DBRW custom report. You can't do a DBRW to these data points because they don't really exist. So they do have their use cases. All right. So how do we do this? These first three lines are what define the definition or what define the calculation. You start with the with command. Great. Almost like SQL, because you do have a with command in SQL. And now we're going to define a member. The member is in the BPM period dimension. Let me move the cursor out of the way. BPM period dimension, BPM period hierarchy, and I called it new calc. So now I have a bucket that I can do some type of math. The next line, the as line, is now going to define the math that will happen in new calc. I am doing something absurdly simple. I am increasing 2016-03 by 10%. So I multiply it times 1.1. The solve order is number 1. I will get to that in a little bit. And I can choose the format right here. I have selected that custom number format, okay? But just because I have defined it doesn't mean I'm using it. The use of new calc happens here on this line, where notice that I am pulling over 2016-03 and then pulling over new calc that was just defined above. That is how you create a calculated member. That is how you define the position, right, based on the commas or where you want it to show up. I'm going to go back a little bit and talk about the solve order, because this is very subtle but really powerful. You can have as many calculated members as you need with one with statement. You can have just member as, member as, member as. So let's pretend that you have 5 different calculations and they're dependent on one another. When you have those calculations, solve order really matters, because you want, the base calculation to have solve order 1, and then 2, 3, 4. As you daisy chain them, you need the right order of calculation. In the same example, just because you have these 5 calculations does not mean that you have to show all 5 calculations. What you could do is do your math on these 5 new calcs, and down here in this line, just return new calc 5, because that's really what the user cares about. The benefit of that is that you have taken a very complicated calculation, you have split it into its component elements, and it is being calculated in the view. This is great for debugging, right? 3 months, 3 weeks later, something breaks. What step is messed up? Well, you can change your select statement, bring out the pieces, fix it, and then change the select statement again to only give that ending result. So that is how you can do calculated members, excuse me, in MDX. I'm going to go next tab, and I'm going to explain how to filter by a value in a cube. What we've done so far is just pull in elements, do a filter with an attribute, but you'll see that a filter by a value is suspiciously similar. If I come over to filter by value, we have run into the filter command. So we're using the filter command again, but in this case, instead of an attribute, it's off of a value. The formatting here does leave a little bit to be desired, and I did this on purpose because I wanted to show every line separately. But let's go through it. The select statement we've seen in every tab. TM1 subset to set. In this particular case, I'm using the 2015 month subset. Now, let's slow down and figure out what is going on. I need a set expression for my first parameter for the filter. So I open my parentheses. My first set is going to be this curly bracket, but inside the curly bracket, I'm doing something new. I'm just getting a distinct, just the unique items. I open up another parentheses, and now this is the set that I'm going to get the distinct of. So I want all the accounts in the default public subset, and I'm getting that distinct list. So that is the first parameter. Then I have the comma. What do I want to do? I want to get a data point from a cube. This is how you define a data point from a cube. It is almost like a DBRW. You point to the cube of interest. So in this case, it's BPM Finance. You use a period, and now you start to point to the data points that you want. In this particular case, when the BPM period dimension, this hierarchy and this element is greater than 2 million, it will pull over that data point. I'm sorry, it will pull over that element because I am filtering on the accounts. I'm going to come over to the view so you can see how Paul, the graphical user interface, displays this, where here is where you can have, I'm going to hover over it. You see that says Jan 15 greater than 2 million. That's exactly what we did over there, greater than 2 million. So you can right click and do a filter in the graphical user interface here, and it'll do the same thing, but you don't have to use the graphical user interface. If you want to do something more complicated, you can create this filter. Now, this begs the question. Of course, this is useful. This is kind of cool. But if I want a different parameter, I have to change my MDX. That's not the best user experience, and I will agree. So, of course, I left the best for last. I'm going to show you how to use parameters from a cube in MDX. There is a new IBM feature that uses variables and parameters. This is not it. This is not the new feature, but this is the old way that you can do it. And I say old, but it's just not the new feature. All right, I'm going to go over to parameters. And I know that I'm kind of excited, but this one's really excited because I'm such a geek and this is really cool. So watch this. I'm going to come over to parameters. First, I'm going to show you the end result and then we'll talk about it. Okay? The result is going to be variance. This formula needs to change. Sometimes I want to do plan minus actuals. Other times I want to do final budget versus actuals or whatever other scenario. So right now it is plan minus actuals. And it's based on this control cube that has the string called plan. So if I change it, and this could be a pick list, this could be a rule, but I'm just doing this input. So I'll do final budget. Now, keep an eye, before I press enter, right? It's 100 over here. I come over here, I press enter, it refreshes, and now I have 850. Now I'm doing 1000 minus 150. It's a calculation. It's using another control cube. It only lives in the finance cube, so I don't need feeders. How does this magic happen? Let's break it down step by step. To return data from a cube, you need this syntax, which I explained, but here you have the template. It's the cube, the period, open the parentheses, and you can read it, dimension hierarchy member, so on and so forth. But MDX doesn't know what to do with the word final budget. What we need, and this is what I said way back in the beginning, remember how I said you're going to be sick of hearing me say this, we need this. This is the format that we want. We want dimension, hierarchy, member. So this member is going to have the word, it's going to be replaced with final budget. But I still need the square brackets, I need the periods, I need all this other stuff. So in order to build that string, what I do is I build the string using string to member, str to member. So this is the example. I am defining the dimension, I am defining the hierarchy, and I'm going ahead, I'm also opening up the first square bracket. I use the plus, which is equivalent to the concatenate. It's equivalent to the ampersand when you join strings in Excel. In MDX, it is the plus sign. And now, this is where I'm doing that kind of different way of doing a DBRW. From the control cube, please give me the target scenario. So we're looking at it over here. And the measure called string. Then I close out my format, right, my pattern with this curly bracket. And what happens here is that I have built this string, scenario, final budget. But it's a string. I need the member. That's why you nest it inside string to member, and MDX does its magic, and it makes that dynamic, it makes that the correct member. So this is great in theory, but this is really how it works on the left. And I'm putting the last couple of slides together. I am using the with statement because I'm creating a new calculation. The member, I called it variance. So scenario, variance. And then I have to define what is going on in variance. Well, I know that at the end of the day, I need it to be a member because that's the only thing MDX understands. So I use string to member. And now I'm going to do exactly what we talked about, where I'm going to build this string piece by piece. I take the first two pieces, right? The dimension, the hierarchy, go ahead and open up the first square bracket, do my DBR, my MDX flavored DBRW, where I have the control cube, the control parameter, the target scenario, close out my square bracket, subtract actuals. Granted, this is hard-coded. I could do the same thing if I wanted to subtract one versus the other. I would just, if I wanted to overcomplicate it, I could just, instead of actuals, have another string to member with another, scenario control. Excuse me. Then I have the solve order and I have the format string. So that is how you can have a dynamic calculation based off of values in the cube, based off of string values in the cube, because if you already know how to do numeric values. So big picture, what you're going to remember is you want to get it into the format that we're looking at over here, where you have dimension, hierarchy name, that whatever element or elements of interest with the square brackets. That's where it gets a little bit clunky, but we're getting there. And I do know that IBM is going to release a new interface for MDX that should make it much better. So once you get it in this format, you go ahead and feed it to the string to member, and you have your member that you can use here. Okay. Now, before I forget, I wanted to show you one more thing because I like to over deliver. I'm going to click on the control cube. I'm going to click on edit MDX. I'm not going to edit, but I'm just going to show you that you can see the MDX here. Great. You have a lot of features here. You can run it, you can change the size, but the one I want to show you is insert MDX function. It's a little f of x, a little function sign. If you click on the little function sign, you get all of the available commands or functions that you have in MDX. And at the bottom, you have the tier 1 specific MDX. So it's all right here. You can kind of see what is going on and what they do. That's fabulous. That is really, really helpful. So I just wanted to point that out because it's really easy to miss. I'm going to close this, and I believe this is all that I have for you. So I'm going to be quiet now and turn it over back to Lee.
Great. Thanks, Ivan. Appreciate it. Excellent. So some next steps, a couple things to take into consideration. Not MDX related, but specifically about PA. As a reminder to everybody on this call, IBM has announced an end of support date for version 209. That end of support date for the local version of 209 is this October. Again, as a reminder, the new version 2.1, does not include the legacy tools. This means that as you migrate up, as you continue to enhance your system, some of the legacy tools like Perspectives and Architect are no longer available. We have a previous webinar that talks through some of the details and some of the approaches, and I definitely encourage you to take a look at that. But more importantly, make sure that you're planning for this. I would strongly recommend you that you're planning for the migration and that you have a plan to go forward. Revelwood can assist you with that plan. We will help you take into consideration all the aspects of a software migration. The software itself, what's going on with the upgrade, what do we need from IT, the concept of the reports, some of the stuff that Ivan just showed with the concept of MDX and some of the new reports. This comes into play for both web-based reports and Excel-based reports. So we want to make sure that we're creating functional reports and optimizing when possible. We want to help you with your training. Make sure that you're aware of the features and the usage of it. And most importantly, like we said earlier, we speak business first. We want to make sure that you understand the impact, you understand the concept of your business functions, not necessarily just looking at this as a software tool, but looking at this as a business process. Okay? And with that said, this is where Revelwood is here to help. Revelwood regularly hosts planning analytics webinars, and we also post a blog series to provide tips and tricks about many topics, technical tips, business concepts, and overall ideas to help you improve your processing. To see a list of all of our past events, you can visit our YouTube site, or you can follow me on LinkedIn for weekly updates. In addition, Revelwood offers training courses on all aspects of planning analytics, including classes associated with today's topics. So please let us know if you'd like to learn anything more. Thank you very much for attending today's webinar. I hope that this presentation gave you some new ideas for your PA modeling, for your report creation, for your overall development. We would really appreciate if you could take just a few minutes to chat with us. So in the next day or so, myself or one of my colleagues will be reaching out to you to get your feedback, just have a brief conversation. But in the meantime, please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions about today's topic or anything else related to your planning analytics environment. That concludes our webinar. Thanks again. Have a great day, everyone.